Welcome, Crater fans. This is a talk from Crater Remote Conf Mobile Edition. This talk focuses on building mobile apps using JavaScript. You can find out more information about upcoming Crater Remote Confs at conf.crater.io. Enjoy the talk. Welcome back to the third session of the third day of Crater Mobile Conf. Today, I'm excited to have Spencer with us speaking. I worked with him when I was at Differential, and he's carried on kind of the Meteor torch there and been doing React Native work as well. And so today, he's going to be talking about using React Native and Meteor to quickly build a cross-platform app. So I will turn it over to Spencer.
Okay. So all right, there's my screen. So today I'm going to be talking about what it's like to build an app with React Native and Meteor. My name's Spencer. And then if you want to access any of the, like stuff I've written on Medium, my email list, I've got a website, react-native-meteor.com, and that's just website that links to my Medium page. Okay, let's see. Yeah, before we get started, just want to give you guys a quick overview of what I'm actually going to be talking. Just quick personal intro, kind of like why I'm actually talking here today. A quick overview of Meteor and React Native for anyone who's not familiar with those. Then just discussing how the two technologies actually work together, what it's like being a developer using this stack, and then just quick overview of actually getting an app into production. Some pros and cons to the stack, and then just a list of resources if you want to go down this route. Just kind of taking some of my work over the last year and making it easier for you so you can really jump into it. So that's what I'll be covering today. Hopefully it'll all be super valuable. So who am I? Why am I talking right now? As Josh mentioned, I'm a developer with Differential. I've been working with them for a while now. I've been using React Native since about July of 2015, so pretty soon after it was officially released to the public. Meteor since around the end of 2013, I think. It's been quite a while with that. And then since I started using React Native, I've been using it with Meteor every day since July of 2015. So I've got quite a lot of experience in this arena. This is where I spend my time in my day job. And then as of last week, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. So if you're in this area, let me know. So I'm trying to rebuild a little network here. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I write about React Native and Meteor and how I use them together on Medium. Okay, so quick overview of just what React Native is, just so everyone's kind of on the same page. React Native's, it's native apps with JavaScript. We use JavaScript and React for just about everything, which means, if you've got an understanding of writing JavaScript and using React, you barely need to know anything about Objective-C or Swift in the iOS environment, and barely any Java in the Android environment. And then also I want to mention that these are real mobile apps. It's not a web view, kind of like what Cordova does. These view, as we see here on the right, a view or a text component, those will actually render down to kind of native equivalent. So it's not a web view, it's an actual real mobile app. And then lastly, just like React, React Native is backed by Facebook. They're kind of leading the charge of managing and distributing React Native with a lot of open source contributions. So that right there, I think, seeing that uses it, they build it, they use it, the Facebook ads manager, I believe, and some of the groups apps, those are built with React Native. So not only are they working on developing it, but they're also, they've got a stake in it. They use it in their apps. Okay. And then also I want to mention, if you've got experience with using, just building a normal native app, be it for iOS or Android, you're probably used to, having to recompile your code. And by using React Native, you don't have to kind of wait for that. As you can see here, hopefully it's showing up all right. But by simply changing a little bit of a little bit of your code, you can hot reload it in your app. And it's great because you don't have to, wait or change out of your editor to go and recompile your code. It's just all, gonna hot reload right there, which is one of my favorite parts of React Native. Okay, a little background on Meteor. Meteor is it's a really fast way to build apps. JavaScript everywhere. We've got JavaScript on our client. We've got it on our server. The database, which is MongoDB, you're storing your data like a JSON object. So that's very familiar there. And then also the build tool, or what Meteor is, it's got it gives you a few things for free, and it's really nice in the sense that you get real-time pub sub. If you want to use that out of the box, it's there, it's ready to go. Same with user accounts. Then you've got like Meteor Methods. There's just a bunch of little things that every modern app is going to use. Meteor just kind of brings that to the table to you, right out of the box without you having to do any sort of configuration. And then behind the scenes, and we'll cover this a little bit more later, we're using WebSockets, which, over WebSockets, we're speaking DDP, which is the protocol the Meteor development group put together to actually make all of this stuff work together. Then also, Meteor's got a Cordova integration. If you're familiar with Cordova, it's just a web view. You're taking your website and kind of wrapping it up in an app, so that you can actually, you can take a website and make it an app essentially. And that's built, that's out of the box in React Native, in Meteor. And then finally, and this is something that's really exciting now compared to, a year ago, React, Angular, and Blaze, they're 3 different front ends that you can use. They're kind of called in the Meteor world, first-class citizens of front ends. So you can use React, Angular, or Blaze. Blaze is Meteor's kind of homegrown front-end solution that's built off of handlebars. So we'll kind of touch on what's so awesome about being able to use React easily with Meteor a little later on. Okay, so now that we've kind of got an understanding of what React Native is and what Meteor is, how do we actually use the two technologies together? Especially, coming from, if you've got like a Meteor background, because Meteor just does so much for us out of the box. So as I mentioned earlier, everything kind of happens over WebSockets, and a Meteor server is going to speak DDP. And if you've tried to work on React Native and Meteor, say a year ago or 9 months ago, even 6 months ago, it was a little tricky because you kind of had to have a little bit more intimate knowledge of DDP, which really isn't used outside of Meteor. But fortunately, open source community being as amazing as it is, there's a NPM package called react-native-meteor out there. And essentially what react-native-meteor does is gives you a full Meteor client API in React Native. So you've got your pub sub, you've got methods, you've got your user accounts, all of that. And it works the same way that you would expect on the web. Beyond just, the Meteor client API that you're used to, there's a few nice to have components that React Native Meteor brings to the table. I'm not really going to cover those here, but if you're interested in wanting to see list views that easily integrate with your Meteor data, go ahead and check out React Native Meteor. Then also, I've got to give credit where credit's due, and that the maintainer, and I apologize if I pronounce his name incorrectly, but Theo Matthew, he's put in a ton of work into actually making this package what it is. He's been super responsive. We've talked a few times because I know they're using, the in-progress team's using it in production apps at Differential, and our clients were using it as well. So React Native Meteor is kind of like the magic that allows us to use React Native together. It'll do all that hard stuff for us behind the scenes. And then the first thing, this is something that is a bit of a deviation from just using Meteor on the web or Meteor in Cordova. In those instances, Meteor, because it's as all-encompassing as it is, you don't have to worry about making the connection. It's just going to do all of that behind the scenes for you. But since React Native is kind of, it's a separate stack from Meteor, you have to think about it as React Native's our client, Meteor, think about Meteor as your server. And we need to manually establish that connection between the two. Again, fortunately for us, React Native Meteor makes that really easy. All we have to say is, connect, meteor.connect, and then put in our WebSocket URL. And that's what that ws:// is. That's just the WebSocket protocol versus like HTTP. And then we're putting in our IP address and our port number. And then Meteor is, we can connect to the WebSocket connection at /WebSocket. And this goes ahead and establishes our WebSocket connection. It manages it. So say somebody, their connection drops or whatever happens, it'll go ahead and manage that reconnect attempt, and it'll update its connection status. So you got access to all of that data. Then of course it's handling, it speaks DDP behind the scenes. So it's a really simple one-liner, but it does a lot of stuff, especially if you've used React Native and Meteor together in the past, where you have to do a lot more of this stuff manually. So that's the first step in getting these two layers, these two stacks to actually work together. Then also, just like on the Meteor web client, we've got this create container function, which is going to allow us to connect, in this case, my component to the Meteor, the reactive Meteor data. And again, just like the standard Meteor API, we've got things like meteor.logging in, meteor.user, all of these different things that are going to allow us to have reactive data. And we can propagate those down through props so that we can use the way that React allows us to actually pass props down and all of that in its normal way. So we can just create that container, and this likely looks very, very similar to what you're used to writing when using Meteor and React on the web. So that's all we need to do to connect a component to our reactive data. Now, if you're familiar with Meteor, which I'm sure some of you are, you've likely used the Meteor methods. And again, I just want to reiterate, Thea's done some incredible work to make the API essentially exactly the same. And Meteor methods is no different. We're able to use meteor.call, to fetch data, basically do all of your CRUD operations that you need to. You can pass in any parameters for that, handle the result, all of that, just like you would on the web. It's super simple. And again, this is all going over WebSockets and speaking DDP. So for anyone not familiar with Meteor, this is essentially what you use, a REST endpoint to. So if you want to fetch data, it's kind of like a GET request, create data, it's kind of like a post, and so on. So that's where these Meteor methods are coming into play. And then also, just like so many other things, React Native Meteors put together the account system, or given us our client-side API. Again, it's one-to-one to what we've come to expect from Meteor on the web. That way, your code is essentially exactly the same. It's just, in this case, where things are compatible with React Native, and you can install it over npm. Something to touch on here is, on the web or any app, once somebody logs in, they're kind of expected to stay logged in for at least some amount of time. And on Meteor for the web or Meteor for Cordova, it's going to store that user token in local storage. And that's kind of one of those deviations that we have between Meteor on the web and Meteor in React Native, where on the web it's being stored in local storage. But in React Native, we don't have that. So we need to in the past, we would have to manually store that token that we received back in async storage, which is essentially the same thing as local storage, just kind of tapping into the native pieces that iOS or Android has to actually store and persist that data. And that's what meteor.login with password is going to do. Accounts.createUser. It's going to not only call those methods that are going to allow us to do these different things, but also to store those tokens and allow a user to just automatically be logged in the next time they open the app up. Which, again, I've talked about, doing this 6 to 9 months ago. You would have to do all of this manually. But now that we've got React Native Meteor, we don't have to worry about that at all. It happens behind the scenes for us, and it just works, kind of like the magic that we've got from Meteor. And then lastly, something Meteor's been kind of famous for, at least when it first came out, was its real-time pub sub system right out of the box. If you choose to use that in the React Native context, again, you've got access to that. We can see, starting on line 13, if you've got a, meteor.publish items, then you're returning a cursor of items, from that publication. You can go ahead and subscribe to it here. And just like, on the web, we're able to return a handler and wait until that publication and the subscription is actually ready and the data is on the client to go ahead and show that data. And then finally, we've got this meteor.collection items.find. And this is one of the bigger deviations, in my experience, that React Native Meteor has from Meteor on the web. So, typically if you use Meteor on the web, you're going to be able to say, something like items.find.fetch to actually return an array of that data. And the reason we can't use that syntax here is because Meteor, being the tool that it is, you're defining your actions on both the client and the server. So you can use that same variable in both places. And Meteor has a really robust implementation of, or they've got the implementation of min-mongo, which is when you say .find, is actually going to return a cursor rather than an array. In React Native, we don't know about the variables that have been defined on the Meteor server, and we can't import those because they're in completely separate environments. So this is kind of the workaround Theo's put together, and that's meteor.collection items, and that's going to tap into wherever the data is stored within React Native and however he's handling that. We'll go ahead and tap into that to actually get that. So you've just got to know the kind of the collection name there versus actually using the variable that's returned when you create a new Mongo collection on Meteor. And then finally, the mini Mongo implementation that is being used in React Native Meteor, it's not quite as robust as it is on the Meteor web, just because, the one that's written for Meteor, it's not on NPM and it's only in Meteor. So this is kind of like the best stopgap until we can get access to that better implementation. And this you can use the majority of the same stuff you would use on mini Mongo. So you've got find one. I think you can even do updates and inserts and all of that. But the only difference for like find is it's not going to return a cursor. It's going to go ahead and return an array for you. And again, once that data is there and it's real time, it's reactive. So once that data updates, and if it's published to the client, it'll go ahead and update that array. Then you can go ahead and handle that in your component to update the U in whatever way makes sense for it. Okay, so we've kind of got a brief understanding of how you actually develop, or how you connect the Meteor stack to the React Native stack. But as developers, like what's it actually look like to develop for the stack? What's your day-to-day going to look like? Well, the first thing we have to do, and this might seem really basic for people, but judging off the questions I've received for people coming from Meteor, especially people who've worked with Meteor for a while now, it's kind of weird having to go outside of the Meteor command. Like, Meteor just, we get used to it doing everything. We've got Meteor create, we've got Meteor run, we've got Meteor run iOS, all of that stuff. And we're still going to use some of that. In this case, we'll use Meteor create, creator Meteor. And that'll give us, the most bare bones Meteor app we could possibly have. And then on the other hand, we've actually got to go ahead and create that React Native app, which is something that I don't want to say confuses people, but you're not used to it if you've worked with Meteor for a long time, because you're just so used to Meteor doing everything for you. So with that, running React Native init creator rn, that'll go ahead and put together an entire native app for you. So you've got a functioning iOS app there, and you've got a functioning Android app as well. Granted, extremely basic, it's just a screen of text, but it is a native app. And something that brings me to something I want to bring up that I love about this specific stack is just how quickly you can go ahead and go from an idea to actually going ahead and building. On the left, we ran Meteor create, creator Meteor. On the right, we ran React Native init creator rn. That's 2 commands, and we've got a fully functional web app. We've got our Meteor server. On the right, we've got a fully functional React Native app. We don't have to worry about any of that configuration. We don't have to worry about messing around with Webpack. It's just we run those 2 commands, and we've got 2 fully functional apps that we can now go ahead and start actually building our applications, which I really like. Just coming from more of the business perspective, I'm able to jump into the business problems versus kind of the developer problems of setting up Webpack and just messing around with all of that stuff. And again, this might seem super basic to a lot of people, but to actually run the apps, again, you kind of have to go out of just the Meteor context. You gotta, Meteor and React Native, they're not kind of tied together like Meteor and Cordova would be. You're gonna have to go ahead and start Meteor in one terminal, and then React Native in another terminal window. I think this is ridiculously simple, but sometimes it's, especially, I've said this multiple times, you're coming from Meteor for a while, it's just weird to kind of have to, open up a new terminal window, use a different command and different command beyond just Meteor to, start running your app and developing with it. So if you're going down this route, remember that you've got to run Meteor. Meteor's acting as your server, then React Native. You've got to run that through its build tool to actually, get that up and running. And then finally, this is kind of a note that just if you do decide to go down this route, remember, and I don't know the reason for this, but if you're developing for an iOS simulator, so just choosing a device in Xcode and running for that, you can use localhost, your meteor.connect. But if you're developing for anything else, and this is in the development environment, you need to use your machine's IP address. So wherever you've got Meteor running. So if you're developing on your iOS, your physical iOS device, if you're developing for the Android emulator or an Android device, just remember that local won't resolve correctly on those devices. Make sure to get your machine's current IP address and plug that into this meteor.connect. Just so you're actually able to make that DDP connection. Otherwise, you'll see in the console that the DDP connection has failed to be created. Okay. So yeah, once you've got Meteor running and React Native running, that's the point at which you can go ahead and make that connection, that meteor.connect, and using and having access to Meteor Methods, the pub subsystem, the account system, all of that. And then from there on out, you're able to do whatever you need to for your specific app. But if you want to go ahead and skip over that, the whole step of generating a Meteor app, generating a React Native app, and kind of figuring out those little pieces you need to do to actually integrate those, I've put together, and it's been out there for a few months now, this React Native Meteor boilerplate. And it just goes through a lot of that configuration that I've talked about today. The meteor.connect, pub sub examples, Meteor method examples. It's just going to go through a lot of that, and it gives you some super, super basic examples, just so you can see what it's actually like and not have to worry about those really, really minute details that you're only ever going to do once per app. And then also with that, I want to mention on the React Native side, that's where all the work is. On Meteor, it's super, super bare bones. So if you go to if you download the boilerplate, get it all running, you're going to see the most basic possible Meteor app if you go to it in the browser. Because there's so many different ways to do a Meteor app, especially with Meteor right now. I didn't want to touch that just so people had as much choice as they could. So all of the work is going to be in the React Native app. And I've also put together some basic directory organization. There's not much there to it, but I think it gives you, a decent understanding of what it's like to actually develop for it, because kind of thinking through the way to structure an app, and I think just the way to structure your files is a little bit different in a native environment versus web. And that mostly comes from differences in routing and different ways to think about that. So yeah, before I move on, I actually want to show you guys what this React Native Meteor boilerplate brings to the table. So we'll jump over here. Let's see, it's not running. Okay, so here is the, once we can see here, we've got the Meteor server running, and then down here, this is actually the React Native packager running. So yeah, that just goes to show that, you've got these two different technologies running side by side. And we'll go ahead and it's a super, super basic boilerplate because I wanted to make sure it would stay out of your way. If you want to use this to build an actual application, I don't want it to, get in the way. It's just a boilerplate. It's not supposed to do a bunch for you, but just a few simple, easy to remove examples. So first off, we'll just go through the create account, and this will tap into that accounts.createUser that I talked about earlier. So we'll add that, then put in a password. And since we're going to create an account, you can kind of see just one way. This is the way I'm choosing to do, password verification, make sure the user's putting the two passwords in the same. Then once we do that, we'll go ahead and create that account. And then here you can see, like I said, it's ridiculously simple, but we've just got some basic routing set up here. So you can just see, in this case, I think I'm using EX router to just handle these different transitions and to see, how once you look in the directory structure, you can see how we're actually organizing files to do this. Then also here we've got, just so we could experience different tabs, we've got like a profile screen, which will show, Spencer at handlebarlabs.com. And this is pulling from the meteor.user. So if I actually open up, I plan on doing this, let's hope I don't break anything. If we open up Mongo and jump into our users collection, let's see, should be this one. So we'll go ahead and edit this document. And since we're using, just add a number there. Since we're using Meteor standard user accounts, it's going to set up a publication behind the scenes first. When I say save, you can see that in this instance, we're using the Meteor pub subsystem. So as soon as I save that data in the database, it'll be reflected in the React Native app. So just like you would expect in a Meteor web app or a Meteor Cordova app, we've got this live reloading data. Then also we can log out. Go ahead and test the error capabilities. Figures I'd get an error when doing this live. Well, there's a bug somewhere in here, but we can go ahead and we'll be able to tap into that account system, that user account that we set up before. And if we refresh the app, it'll go ahead and log us back in. It's making that DDP connection, doing everything for us behind the scenes. So that's the React Native Meteor boilerplate. Especially if you just want to mess around with it and see what it's like to build with this, I'd highly suggest you guys take a look at that and just search React Native Meteor boilerplate, and it'll be there on GitHub. Okay, back to the slides. Okay, so that's kind of what you can expect from developing for this stack. What about in production? You've got Meteor, you've got React Native. What's it like getting it from your development environment into production? First off, and I'm not going to touch on this much, but you got to deploy your Meteor app somewhere, and kind of the three top options, I think, and people might have different opinions, but there's Galaxy, which is Meteor Development Group. It's their actual commercial offering. That's Meteor hosting, and that's what I generally use. MUP, which is open source and allows you to deploy a Meteor app to DigitalOcean or AWS, that kind of stuff. And then Modulus is similar to Galaxy. It's just another way to deploy a Meteor app. So that's like the first step you've got to take, is to actually deploy your Meteor app. And then submitting to the Apple App Store. What's that like? Is it going to be different since you're using React Native, which is JavaScript? Like, are there any complicated steps? And the answer is no. Like, this is an actual, native iOS app, so you're going to go through the exact same processes that you would if you're developing a native app. So, and this is oversimplification, probably wrong terminology, but essentially you need to go ahead and compile your app. You need to compile all of that Objective-C that's going on behind the scenes. When you do that and compile it as a release or create that archive, React Native's aware of that event, and it'll go ahead and minify your JavaScript bundle and all of that, and just kind of store everything ready to go, looking like the native app that it is. At that point, you need to go through iTunes Connect. You need to jump through all of Apple's hoops. It's the normal time-intensive process. Especially if you're coming from like deploying to the web, where it's one or two commands and it's out there and your clients have all of that. So it's a very similar process to what you might be familiar with if you've developed an iOS app. And then also, and this is a tool that we use a lot, or we're starting to use a lot, that's called Fastlane. If you're not familiar, basically it'll take all of these steps that you have to go through to get an app into the App Store and put it all into like one command. So I can just say Fastlane beta. I can wait 10 minutes or whatever it is to compile the app, release the app, upload it to iTunes. All of that is done within Fastlane. And because we're generating a real native app, we're able to use this Fastlane tool. So we use Fastlane for our the iOS version of the React Native app I'm working on right now, to handle that release process to our beta testers. So if you're familiar with it, but you're worried, if you use React Native, you can't use some of these conveniences that have been developed for iOS developers, just know that things like Fastlane, you can totally use them. We're using it right now. So it's a standard process there. And the same goes for the Google Play Store. You're actually generating an Android app. So you need to go ahead, you need to sign that app. You need to generate your release APK. You need to upload it to upload it to the Play Store. Again, all the normal steps that you'd have to for a normal Android app. And this is something I'm not sure of, but I wanted to bring to people's attention is Fastlane. It's an absolutely incredible tool. And in the past, it's been totally iOS centric. Like that's all it's done. But I believe the scope of the project is kind of expanding to include Android. And we're not using it yet. But again, you're building an Android app. It's just, you happen as a developer, you're just happening to write it via React Native. You can use this Fastlane tool, hopefully in the near future, maybe even now, to handle that deployment process that you've got to do through the Google Play Store. And then finally, over-the-air updates. This is one of the supreme advantages of using React Native or any sort of way where you're running JavaScript on your native app. And React Native is actually running on the JavaScript core environment on both iOS and Android. And that means that, we're able to actually send updates to the phone or whatever the device is over the air, rather than having to, like we said earlier, we don't have to compile native code. It's just JavaScript. So we just kind of need to, bundle that up and then ship it off. And if you've used Meteor and Cordova, like that was one of the things when I was first getting started with React Native that I was worried about, like, how am I going to do over-the-air updates? But since it's just JavaScript you're writing, you're able to ship that over the air. And one of the tools we're using a differential is called Code Push. It's a delivery service that we're able to. It takes care of a lot of the smaller things. So team collaboration, just kind of like running all the commands behind the scenes. So if I want to send out a new over-the-air update, I just have one command I have to run, and Code Push handles, bundling, minifying, getting all the image assets if there's any updates there. It handles getting all of that together, and it ships it off. And then next time somebody opens up the React Native app, it'll look for that update if there's a new one out there. You've got a few different ways you can actually download it, and then the user has your new updated code. And I don't know if I mentioned before, but there's a bunch of different tools out there rather than Code Push. Code Push just happens to be the one that we ended up going with. They're backed. It's actually built by the Microsoft team. So again, like that's an advantage. It's a larger team, it's a big organization actually, putting effort behind that. And the team within Microsoft that's developing Code Push is one, they're like really smart and they've done some awesome stuff there, but it's like their job to handle this open source stuff and to develop it. So that was one of those reasons we went down the Code Push route. But if you're not comfortable working with that, just know there's a bunch of different options you can use to handle these over-the-air updates. And then finally, with over-the-air updates, talking to a few developers, I want to put a word of warning out there. Like, it sounds awesome and that you can do anything, and like you never have to deal with Apple or Google and their kind of the pain that is releasing an app through the App Store. But there are limitations. One, there's technical limitations. So if you're ever changing native code, like renaming your app, if you're adding something like a blur view, which is going to tap into native implementations, and basically if you ever text code or you ever have to go into like Android Studio and modify anything, that's one of those updates you're probably not going to be able to send over the air. So be aware of that. Just know that you can't send every single update over the air. And then also, beyond just the technical limitations there, you want to be aware of kind of their terms of use. If you're developing an app that is a calculator one day and then you're completely changing it and shipping all the new stuff to make it into some other app that, rather than as a calculator, it does, I don't know, it takes pictures or something. Like that's a pretty big difference in the intended use of that application. And that's kind of a no-no on Apple's terms. So just be aware of that. Like for that stuff, for a change of function in the app, or if you're creating a new feature, I typically suggest going through the App Store, going through that normal, sometimes painful review process, just to make sure you're covering your bases there. But if you've got a bug fix or something, it's completely okay to send those kinds of things over the air. And using React Native and Code Push, it just makes it really, really easy to do that. Okay, some pros of this stack. Let's see, there's a bunch. One, both Meteor and React Native are super, super fast to get started with, and again, to develop with. They're doing a lot for you to make it easier to focus on building your application rather than doing a lot of the configuration stuff. It's JavaScript everywhere. Rarely will you need to touch any Objective-C or Java, or in some cases Swift. So if you're comfortable with JavaScript, you can get really, really far with React Native. Meteor, like I said earlier, Meteor and React Native take care of a lot of that tooling, so you can just get going and build right away. And then if you're using React on the web, you're able to use React principles across your entire stack. You've got React on the web, and then you've got React Native on your iOS/Android app through React Native. So it's really awesome, especially if you're kind of like a full stack developer, like you're working on the web, the mobile app, the backend. It's easier to do those context switches since you're using React principles everywhere. With every pro, there's a con. A few cons are there's a loss of flexibility, especially on the Meteor side. It's a big tool, and you're locked into a fair amount of it. With it making it super easy, like that really, really easy pub sub, the really easy pub sub system, you're kind of locked into Mongo at this point, which for some companies that's a non-starter. For a lot of the stuff, for everything I work on, it's fine. Like Mongo's perfectly fine database for us, but it's something to be aware of. Like you do lose some flexibility by taking in this ease that Meteor brings to the table. And then also, Meteor makes it easy to build, React Native makes it easy to build. And the reason it's a lot easier is you've got this layer of abstraction on top of it. And this can lead to some confusion if you ever run into, debugging issues, because, sometimes that'll lead you down something that, is in a Objective-C file or a Java file. And it gets a little tough. It's somewhat easy to read code and kind of comprehend that, but it is something to be aware of. But I do have to admit, I have to say, as a caveat to that, I use React Native and Meteor every day. On the React Native side, like I rarely, even less so every day with every new release, have to touch any Objective-C or Java. So just know that, like, yes, it can sometimes lead to a problem, but it's getting less and less. And the error messages that do come with React Native are typically really, really good. Then also something to be aware of, if you're familiar with Meteor and you kind of keep up with it, you know this, but Meteor's kind of in a state of flux now. People are kind of trying to figure out, what's next, what's Meteor look like 6 months down the line. So just be aware of that. But I will say, like, I'm still using Meteor. Any side projects I'm working on, I still use Meteor. Again, because I can start building, within 5 minutes worth of it, versus having to spend a bunch of time setting up my actual development environment. And then finally, last thing I want to talk about is just, before you use Meteor's pub subsystem, it looks like magic, it's awesome, but just think if that's the right choice for your application, especially on the web. Sometimes it's just real time doesn't make sense. And especially when you consider, how often connections are dropping on mobile. These are things you need to be aware of when you're using WebSockets and, have this real-time option at hand. Just be considerate of that. I don't know that it's a con, but it's something that you've got to be considerate of. Then I quickly talk about, looking into the future, especially on the Meteor side. We've got Apollo, which is kind of GraphQL, super easy to adopt and incrementally adopt. You've got more choice, so instead of being locked into Mongo, you can tap into a whole bunch of stuff. So there is a future. If you're afraid of kind of like this Meteor, the state of flux it is in, there's kind of like a path forward. It's just not a super defined path at this point, but just be aware of that. Hopefully, just about done. Have an understanding of Meteor and React Native, how to actually connect those two technologies together, how to develop for the stack, and just some different spots to get started. What it's like to use getting the app into a production environment. Quick coverage of pros and cons, and then a quick look into the future. Resource list. I guess we'll see how we can actually show this, but these are just a few of the different technologies I talked about throughout this. That's React Native, Meteor, React Native Meteor, Code Push, Fastlane, the React Native Meteor boilerplate, and then finally react-native-meteor.com, which will bring you to my Medium post where I go into a lot more depth on a lot of this stuff there. So if you want to learn more, check out react-native-meteor.com, sign up for the mailing list, and yeah, just read some of that stuff. Hopefully it's pretty valuable. And that's it. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and let me know what you thought. You can reach me, Spencer_Carly on Twitter. And yeah, if you've ever got any questions or want me to dive deeper into something, just hit me up there or shoot me an email.
Awesome. Good talk there, Spencer.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors before you see the rest of the talk. Raygun. Spend more time building great software and less time fighting it. Raygun helps keep a watchful eye on your web and mobile applications and tells you when problems arise. You can learn more at raygun.com. NativeScript, backed by Prereq by Progress, is an open source framework for building truly native mobile apps with TypeScript and Angular 2. Use your web skills to get native UI and performance on iOS and Android. Enjoy the rest of the talk.
Appreciate that. Yeah, so there were 7 so far. The first one is from Ryan. Have you ever used Redux with React Native and Meteor before? Since leaving Meteor, I've fallen in love with writing stateless functional views, which are fed from a top-level store like Redux. All data flows one direction and is easily understood. From my experience, using Meteor's pub subsystem makes data more difficult to manage.
Yeah, so we do use Redux very heavily. Like the entire app I'm working on right now everything's based on Redux. But as you mentioned, using the pub subsystem makes that really, really difficult. And in full disclosure, like we don't use Meteor's pub subsystem for anything beyond like the user account. So it's a consideration to make. Redux with React Native and Meteor, it's totally possible, but tapping into the pub subsystem is going to get tricky. The one thing that we do use it for user accounts, we just kind of manually check if there's a difference between, I think it's like the user ID, or if meteor.user returns null, or if it has an object, we'll go ahead and manually update the store, and like a component should update, or a component will update. Whatever that lifecycle event is how we actually go ahead and manage that update.
Let's see, what else do we have? What is the fundamental reason to use both React and Meteor together instead of going all in on React? Atmosphere, Blaze, ?
Yeah, so reason we're using React and Meteor together is just like the speed that we can get developing. Really, Meteor for us is just a server, so we're using it for kind of the out-of-the-box Mongo. We've got user accounts. We've got a lot of stuff there where it's just 1 or 2 commands and we've got it. We don't have to worry about that anymore, and where it's just good to go. So I love the stuff we get for free, and that's the reason we use Meteor.
Awesome. Is the data fetched on the React Native side cached in async storage? Would it persist when losing the network?
I'm not super familiar with React Native Meteor behind the scenes, but I don't think it's cached. So like if you do lose a network connection, if you're not properly making checks in your app, you might lose that data. But like I mentioned earlier, we're using Redux. So if you're using Redux on your React Native client, things like Redux storage, you can go ahead and write that to async storage to persist it if you do lose a connection, kind of give the user at least a temporary experience.
All right. I am almost done with my iOS native app. Would you recommend recoding in React Native to go X platform, or just move ahead with native web and native Android?
I mean, I guess I don't know.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
So like maybe I'll jump in here. Like I'll just say you got to decide what makes the most sense to your business and like about that business value. And if you think it's going to be hard to hire someone to do the Android side of things, or you're worried about the Java side, like for writing Android, like that might make sense to maybe rethink it and recode it. But I'm not sure. There are a lot of instances where I would stop something that's close to production and go back and redo it on another platform at this point.
Yeah, I guess I'd say just if I was in that situation, I'd say like maybe if you're going to start this Android app, do it in React Native, and be aware that way. If you've got the resources, if you've got you need feature parity, you can kind of, as you're working on your Android app, just slowly sprinkle in this iOS stuff and just be aware of that. But to drop an app and then rebuild that, it depends on your business. I don't know.
Yeah. I can't imagine like sitting and waiting on a business, like launching a business would be the right move in my gut. I don't know. Good question though. And my iOS app is all core data. I'm intrigued by Realm as a cross-platform database. How does React Native deal with the database across all these platforms? Have you used Realm yet?
I haven't. I wanted to tap into it, but I think instead of going Realm, we ended up using Redux, which does everything we need it to. But Realm does look really interesting. I just can't talk about any specifics on it. But I do know there's like a Realm React Native binding that you're able to use Realm in iOS and Android.
Sebastian asked, is Meteor a dangerous choice for a long-term solution? Is there a possibility it may lose support in the future?
I mean, there's a possibility anything will lose support in the future.
Yeah, like I would say maybe it loses like MDG support in the future, which is awkwardly weird because they're in a development group. But like, I don't think it's gonna go away. I think it'll just be more of a community supported solution, which is essentially what's happened at this point, right? Like Ben Newman's the guy working on it, and that's about it. And they recently, just as of like yesterday, said he's going to be working on Apollo integration for Meteor 1.5. So like even he's sort of Meteor, sort of Apollo. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean with that, like maybe Meteor as we know it today won't exist in 6 months, a year, but as we see with like, I think it's Meteor 1.5 or 1.4, just kind of like integrating Apollo, the stuff that the Meteor development group is working on today, there'll at least be a path moving forward of integrating with these new technologies and doing that stuff.
Yeah. So not a way, but maybe very different.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a common one too. Like, how much code reuse sharing can you get between your Meteor React View layer and your React Native components? I guess.
Yeah.
Some, none.
Yeah. So this is something we're trying to figure out a little bit. We don't super have a use case right now to dive into it since we're not really building for the web. But something we're looking at is mostly, since we're using Redux, we hope we're going to be able to kind of share our reducers, our actions, all of that stuff. But when we actually look at the components, since a React component's going to have divs, H1 tags, P tags, all of that, which React Native doesn't know about. We use a view component, text component, all of that. There isn't too much we can use there, and I don't know that we want to, because the web app is probably going to look different from your native app. But those things behind the scenes, the Redux stuff, that's where I see a lot of that code reuse happening. I just haven't been able to dive into that because it's not on any apps that I'm working on.
Yeah. All right. I think that was the last question, which is good timing because we got about 4 minutes till the panel starts. So thank you, Spencer, for that talk. It was very, very interesting to watch.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back around 4 p.m. Eastern in 4 minutes to start the next one.
Thanks for watching this CraterConf talk from the Mobile Edition 2016. For more information about upcoming conferences such as the one in February 2017, go to conf.crater.io to learn more.